Hi there. They say that to understand all is to forgive all. But what I mean by forgiveness, which always has a sort of connotation of being a doormat, uh, to my mind, instead of forgiveness, what I mean by forgiveness is objectivization or becoming objective about something. So you're no longer looking at something emotionally, such as war and conflict. You're looking at the causes of these phenomena, and you're looking at ways of counteracting the causes as far as you possibly can, if that's at all possible in the lower worlds, or simply to learn to accept through becoming objective about these phenomena, treating war and conflict as any other phenomena in the phenomena world. And so it's like, kind of nothing matters on one hand, but need not be on the other. So, war and conflict arise from the perception of necessity. But it could be that war and conflict are unnecessary in pretty much all circumstances, and or certainly in theory. But there's always somebody who has some sort of practical practical viewpoint that everything becomes necessary, and therefore from necessity springs the almost uh, the moral directive or moral impetus to act in the face of non-action. But and then also the Gnostic looks at the causes of war from a soul perspective. That is to say, what would it be like if soul was existence instead of what we have now? So, rising from war and conflict, which I've represented here by the inverted pentagram, which is always a symbol of foreboding, but some people argue a symbol of strength, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, kind of philosophy. Be that as it may, we have here. I've spent a long time thinking about this. Like territory, for example, which one might ascribe to Earth, element of Earth, and but it's not just physical territory or political economic territory. It's well, it's the literal land over which we fight. And one thinks of the Middle East with all that oil gushing around, and one thinks of the breadbasket of Europe, which is supposed to be the Ukraine. It used to be ancient Egypt, but it's now, I suppose, Ukraine and lots of the places like that. Bread baskets, sources of oil, and people like to put a sort of a kind of a ring round their territory and say it's theirs. And not yours, but theirs, or it's yours for a price. So you have to buy things from my territory. I, me, mine. The territory belongs to me. It's my territory. And when I mean I and me and mine, I mean sort of the collective I and the collective me and the collective mine. Really, the whole uh, development of nationalism since the 18th century, 19th century onwards, really. And everybody wants their own territory, their own living space, their own Volk, where their own people, their own culture exists, to the exclusion sometimes or often of other cultures. So you have your idea of territory, but it's also territory in the sense of my personal space, which you can't come into without my permission, consent. But often people have a kind of ambiguous attitude towards this thing about consent. and permission. And basically, people have a terror of any kind of invasion of their territories, if it's their living space or their own body space, civic space, or whatever. And even if they do ostensibly give their permission for their territory to be entered into, physical territory, bodily territory, in fact, turns out that they didn't give you permission at all. And then he starts screaming about rape and abuse and all this. Um, Whereas with the whole thing has come from an ambiguous attitude towards the whole thing about territory and what is mine and what is yours. And but when you think about it, war over territory or conflict over territory, has been going on ever since Neanderthal, a man, or before that, really. And hunting territory, yes, it's no good having a territory over which to hunt and gather if you're having to fight other tribes or other troops of chimps in order to secure your territory. You have to go out and give them a beating first to cower them into staying away from your territory. So territory is a very basic human thing, and it is the main conflict for war. And then we also have intellectual territory, my theory, my intellectual property. Um, and one thinks basically of soul, and the idea of soul, which would be the opposite of everything that you've taken for granted. So, which is another reason why I symbolize it with the inverted pentagram, because the inverted pentagram is kind of the reverse of everything that is according to your perception, according to your norms, values, and beliefs. So, in terms of soul is infinite, touches all planes of existence infinitely in an infinite sphere simultaneously. So, of course, its idea, what is territory? It doesn't have any territory because literally, it doesn't have I, me, or mine. So, there are no boundaries around soul. So it's meaningless to talk of territory as far as soul is concerned. And I also think the Native American Indians, a lot of the tribes didn't have, not all the tribes, but some of the tribes have this idea that that the earth just belongs to everybody. There's no such thing as territory. So they were already looking at, some of the tribes were looking at soul, looking at it from a soul perspective. So you sort of, if you're everywhere, omnipresent, well, you're everywhere, and there isn't any place where you're not, and there isn't any place where any other soul or any other existent being or intelligence is. So there is basically no borders, no territory. And some people in the '60s had these sort of communes where there wasn't any territory, there wasn't any kind of like my girlfriend or my boyfriend or whatever. Everybody just shared each other's bodily pleasures with each other, which I suppose was okay before AIDS. But also the problem was that jealousy, the old green monster, did raise its ugly head, even in the most hippie-ish and free communes, and communes often imploded and became hierarchical or became dogmatic or became quite tyrannical even. It's like this thing about anarchy, there's no territory in an anarcho syndicus commune, but it turns out there is territory, unspoken territory. But we'll come on to that in a minute. Um, so territory, very basic cause of conflict and war, but seen from a soul perspective, really territory is a meaningless word. So that's kind of earth element taken care of. And then we go up to above the earth normally, which is here below the earth, which is air. And I've assigned identity to air because, of course, identity, if anybody attacks your identity or your sense of identity, which is either individual or communal, you will become anxious, you will become afraid, you will become resentful. And often we go to war over the politics of identity and the norms, values, and beliefs surrounding the idea of identity. Identity. It's like ego is attached to identity, and I am this, I am that. I am even I am a Gnostic, and you're not a Gnostic, so you're a bad person, and I'm a good person. Very often, you love Jesus, you're a good American. If you don't love Jesus, you're a bad American, or you're not even an American. You're an un-American if you don't love Jesus, whatever that means, or whatever Jesus means. That's not very clear. So identity can be kind of like a very vague thing, but it's a sort of feeling of I-ness, you know. And if you feel attacked, if your identity is being attacked, and sometimes you attach yourself to ideas, so you define yourself by your norms, values, and beliefs and ideas, and utopian ideals, and then you feel attacked. You feel at risk when somebody criticizes you or critiques your ideas because you put so much of your identity into those ideas. So that could be another source of conflict and war. Um, I think of the soul perspective. I mean, hardly makes any sense to have identity in soul. I mean, you can't even say I am soul. All you can really say is there is soul, or I suppose soul am I. Um, that doesn't even make sense, really. From the soul perspective, there just isn't identity. I, me, and mine disappear, and you kind of flow into everything around you. So, but what does you mean? What does me mean? It wouldn't really apply. Idea of identity wouldn't actually exist in this soul sphere or the transcendental God universe that or the realm of the transcendental. You wouldn't have identity. So everything just slips off. Ideas would be there, perhaps, or experiences. You like you might float around like you would in a computer game, and you might even, I don't know, even have a role playing. There would be role playing kind of things going on, MMOs, RTSs, role playing games, but nothing would really be you. You would be playing the game, but you would also not being a game player. Which is probably like in computer games, sometimes you become really into it. But then when you come out of the game, you are not that which you have been playing. You see, in the role playing scenario. So identity is at least very very transcendent and temporary, I might say. There's no permanent sense of identity when you're playing a computer game, unless you become completely obsessed with the game, which is they say not very healthy. So one could imagine from the soul perspective or soul in a soul kind of scenario, it's like playing computer games really, and maybe computer games are sort of, I don't know, perhaps a prelude to the transcendental realm that we might exist in eventually. Um, so going to the idea of fire, which is agenda. I put this. This is a very very strong thing. I was going to put other things here, like rivalry, and therefore resentment and competition. And some people say that war and conflict are sort of hard baked, hardwired into capitalism, for example. I'm not quite sure about that really. They seem to be hardwired into the human condition rather than just any particular political economic system, as it were. But agenda is something very interesting. People go to war or go and come uh, sort of blunder into conflict with other people because they have an agenda. I mean, the military industrial complex, you've often heard this. This is one of this is the origin of all conspiracy theories, basically, which is a pretty interesting one. It just means that, They say that war isn't good for anything. What is war good for? Absolutely nothing at all, as the song says. But that's not quite true because, warmongers, security services, intelligence services, the people that make military equipment, military systems, they have an agenda. I mean, basically, to put it put it crudely, I mean, if there wasn't any war or conflict, they'd all be out of a job, wouldn't they? But to be facetious about it, I mean, they would say, well, we have to be prepared because war is so hardwired into the human condition that if we're not prepared for war, then we actually, well, they will say that actually we actually prevent war by being prepared for war. That's how we prevent it. That's what they would argue. So obviously they have almost a peace agenda for a start, because they're from their point of view, the military-industrial complex says that we're preventing war by being prepared for it. So they have a peace agenda as they see it from one point of view, but they also have a huge stake, economic state in perpetrating war, perpetrating the preparation for war in peacetime. And of course the whole arms trade thing. I mean, one of the things about the arms trade is that you have to test weapon systems in the field in a conflict situation, in a combat situation. It's all very well talking about weapon systems on paper. It's all very well trying them out in laboratories, or even trying them out on animals. They often shoot animals with dum-dum bullets and things like that to see what happens. But basically, you have to have real soldiers in a real combat system situation using a particular weapon system, whether it's an individual rifle or some kind of Scud missile system or anti-missile system. It has to be tried out in the field, and then when it's successfully tried out in the field, when they've monitored the combat efficiency of a weapon system, then it's ready for sale. Because you can you point your weapon system and say, look, this is how this weapon system operates under combat stress conditions. And it did very well. So buy this weapon system, and you too will be prepared for war. You too will succeed where we succeeded. You see, so very very important. So whenever you have a war, it's basically to do with the agenda that the military-industrial complex is furthering and protecting, and instigating almost, and so war is necessary. Really, at some point, war is always necessary to actually, it's like washing. If you had a washing machine, for example, and you tried it out in the laboratory, that's all very well and good, but you've got to have the house person using your product. And then they give you feedback. They say, well, it's rubbish for doing this or whatever, and then you improve your product. So basically, in order to improve your military products, you have to have people using them and giving you feedback about how they actually in the real world actually operate and actually survive, and benefit the strategic advancement of the troops. So agenda, very very important. I put that at fire because agenda is very often sort of at the basis. It's a kind of like the fiery will. People follow an agenda very strictly, clandestinely often, but they do fire. So very very important. It's very much at the back of people's minds, and sometimes they're following an agenda subconsciously even. They don't even realize they're following a certain agenda. Like our anarchists, say everybody's equal and everything and wonderful, but hierarchy soon raises its head because people are following an agenda to become powerful, to acquire power, political power through a particular political system, no matter how utopian that system may appear to be. So very, very important. And of course, with power comes responsibility. But of course, if you don't realize you have an agenda for power, then often you don't take responsibility for it. And so you become an irresponsible person with an agenda. And that's even more dangerous than somebody who knows what they're about, if you see what I mean. So that's fire. So then we come on to the final element, which is water, which is avarice. And that's basically, I want, I'm entitled, I have rights, I want to do, I want more of something. It's not fair if I can't get it. It's not fair if other people have it and I don't. Avarice. I want to control the oil reserves of the world. I want to control the breadbasket of the Ukraine. I want, I want more resources for myself, and I'm going to expand my territory around those resources so that I can control them. And you would think that in these days of corporations and European unions and economic unions and federations, that you wouldn't have this, avarice, I want more. We should be at the stage of sharing everything, but it doesn't happen. And avarice is very often at the core of conflict and war. And of course, thinking about avarice and thinking about agenda, of course, soul doesn't have an agenda and soul doesn't have avarice, because if soul is in a situation of infinite abundance, then how can it want more? It doesn't make any sense to want more. It doesn't make any sense to want more than the other person because it's all soul anyway. So there's no scarcity. There's only abundance forever and infinite. And as I say, it's like playing computer games, on God mode. You're never going to run out of resources. You never have to manage resources, and you never have to deal with other people who have an agenda because by definition, soul wouldn't have an agenda, and it wouldn't be troubled by emotional avarice. Because if we don't have what we want, we become anxious, we become resentful, we become avaristic, we become angry, frustrated, and that can often turn to violence, especially if avarice is connected with identity, and you want things, but the other tribe has them in your country and you don't. So the Hutu have things and the Tutsi don't. So the Tutsi hate the Hutu, and then you have a million people dying in one morning through xenophobic genocide. So they're quite serious, a serious, powerful, elemental forces going on here, which can make people do incredibly horrible things to each other. And then we come down to spirit. For spirit, I have the three misses. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, and misinformation. We have Tony Blair being and other leaders of the world being convinced that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction when he didn't. They were literally given false information, misinformation by the intelligence forces, who, of course, were following their own agenda, keeping themselves in a job. And part of the military-industrial complex. Let's get fighting a second war against Saddam Hussein. This time to destroy Saddam Hussein because it's no longer useful to the CIA, which he was before. So we have that. We have misinformation. We have miscommunication. People don't understand each other culturally, and misunderstanding and miscommunication will sort of rather go together. Really, they can be bracketed together. And I think it's important because xenophobia obviously arises from people not understanding other people's culture, norms, values, and beliefs, and seeing them as being untrustworthy, suspicious, possibly of threat to your own tribe. And therefore, the three misses are very often quite a powerful source of conflict and war in the world today. And of course, the three misses don't apply to soul because communication Well, I mean, if you're simultaneously at all points of the universe, then you're communicating with all points of the universe. You're in a relationship to the entire universe, not to any one part or parts of it. So therefore, if you're looking at it from soul point of view, the three misses don't apply. Um, Ultimate happiness and peace would actually exist in the transcendental universe of the soul. And people often say, "Well, this doesn't really exist. Though. There's no such thing as soul, really, is there? Or a transcendental God or paradise. It's just an idea, isn't it? It's a nice idea. Well, perhaps it is, but perhaps it's also an idea which is at the basis of soul awareness, from which people often say, well, you know, is it really necessary to go to war and to have conflict in society? On one hand, yes, it doesn't really matter because it isn't soul anyway. But on the other hand, is it really necessary? And does not matter, need not be kind of formula applies here. So, we don't have to have war and conflict and all the misery attendant to war. We can find another way, and perhaps that other way, um, you know, stems from an imaginative leap that we can make into this sort of incredible universe of soul, where there are no agendas, there is no identity, there is no territory, there is no avarice, and because we can make this imaginative leap as human beings, we perhaps can look at this from a practical, objective way, and think about ways of making soul a reality on this earth. Of course, because it is the lower worlds, you're not going to get that far, really. So peace starts with the home, and then it spreads out to your immediate neighborhood, and then to your wider community, and then perhaps to your country, and then perhaps to the whole world, or Europe, or Asia, or whatever. But of course, as you keep going away from the center, everything becomes more vulnerable to corruption because it is the lower world. So utopia is all very well, but it doesn't spread that far outside your immediate neighborhood, actually. And you should keep everything decentralized and small. And if we kept things small and decentralized, perhaps our ideals will be more will be better served by doing that rather than thinking globally. I mean, you can think globally, but you have to act locally, kind of thing. Um, so I hope I've shown that soul realization, which comes from Gnosticism, can have a limited practical application to the world we live in, but it does seem that war and conflict are hardwired into the human condition, into the human situation, into the situation of scarcity, fear, and frustration and forlornness that I've described in other videos. And all we can really remain is objective about the condition of the human mind and of the condition of the universe of phenomena. And That's all we can really do is remain objective rather than getting emotional about it, because if we get emotional, we'll just go headlong into some kind of reactive mindset, and we can actually become then part of the conflict and war of the world. Universes crashing into war. Well, peaceniks can become warmongers. But on the other hand, warmongers can also become peaceniks as well, when warmongers suddenly realise that there's more brass from peace than there is from war, then they can change their agenda, and it is possible to turn turn swords into plowshares. It often happens. So we live in it's a dual universe we live in, and anything is really possible. But we must remain objective. We must understand the universe in order to forgive it. By which I mean we need to remain objective, and to look at the world as a diseased person. And we are the sort of physicians or doctors or nurses. And, you know, if you're a doctor and a nurse and you get emotionally hurt by suffering, and emotionally involved in your suffering patients, you won't be any good to them whatsoever. So you need to remain objective about what's going on in the world today, in terms of being a Gnostic, whatever that's supposed to mean.